And now a new type of communication is coming along. It's called photography. And up to this point, making pictorial images and preparing the printing plates to produce them, such as lithography, remained handwork processes. There were no steam-powered, printing presses to prepare pictorial images. So all of these were handwork process until the arrival of photography. And the 19th century concept behind the device for making images by photomechanical process was the camera obscura, and in Latin known as dark chamber. And this device was known in the ancient world as early as the time of Aristotle in the 4th century BCE. So here you see an illustration of an artist using the 19th century camera obscura. And the word photography comes from the Greek, of course, right? Photos, gravos, meaning light drawing. So who is familiar with camera obscura? It's like an aid in drawing, where you, this darkened box. You can actually make one fairly simply. It projects an image that you, sort of aim it at onto a piece of paper, and so you can trace an image from life on a piece of paper using this camera obscura. And artists were, using this device, from the time of Aristotle. So the camera obscura is a darkened box with a small opening or a lens in one side. Light rays passing through the aperture are projected onto the opposite side and form a picture of the bright objects outside. Artists have used these as an aid for centuries. The only additional element needed to fix or make permanent the image projected into the camera obscura was the light-sensitive material capable of capturing the image. So up to this point, artists were, as you can see, tracing the image that they saw. How many photographers in the class here? Okay, you must know all about the history of photography. Are there any photographers? Okay, well, here we have the very first photograph from nature. This was a photograph taken by Joseph Niepce. Okay, so this is the correct pronunciation, Niepce, Joseph Niepce, 1826. And remarkably, this was taken with camera obscura. So Joseph Niepce was a French inventor, now usually credited as the inventor of photography and pioneer in that field. Niepce developed heliography, a technique that he used to create the world's oldest surviving product of a photographic process, a print made from a photo-engraved printing plate in 1825. He used a primitive camera to produce the oldest surviving photograph, the earliest photograph of a real-world scene made using a camera obscura. The date of Niepce's first photographic experiment is really uncertain. He was led to them by his interest in the new art of lithography. So lithography is a method of printing posters. Let's see. Oh, Russell, I do some photography. Okay, so, at the time, as I was saying, anything, pictorial images, if they were going to be printed on a poster or newspaper, magazine, whatever, had to be prepared through lithography, which was, sort of you actually used stones, right? big limestones that were prepared by drying on them and, you know, covering with sort of like an acid base, and then, you know, inking the stones and then putting them through the press, all of that. So he was experimenting with, you know, multiple prints from lithography. And then he realized he lacked the skill and artistic ability, and by his acquaintance with the camera obscura, a drawing aid which was popular among affluent artists in the 18th and 19th century. The camera obscura's beautiful but fleeting little light paintings inspired a number of people, also including Thomas Wedgwood and Henry Fox Talbot, to seek some way of capturing these images more easily and effectively than can be done by tracing over them with a pencil. And so here we have this astonishing image. This is Paris Boulevard, Louis-Jacques Daguerre. This is known as a daguerreotype in 1839. And this astonishing image has to rank among the 100 greatest photographs of all time. It is a daguerreotype, which was taken by Louis-Jacques Daguerre, after whom the process is named, of course. And it's an image recorded on a sheet of copper coated with silver and developed by mercury fumes in 1839. So if you look carefully at the bottom left, so right down in here, okay, so there's this interaction going on down in here. There you see two human figures, a customer having his boots polished by a shoe shiner. These two unknown characters were the first humans ever to be photographed. Their simple, everyday transaction has made them immortal. In this early daguerreotype, the wagons, carriages, and pedestrians are not recorded because the slow exposure could only record stationary objects. So if you look at this boulevard, it's completely empty, you know, except for these two figures who were, of course, stationary. You know, while he's getting his boots polished, he has to stand there. And so because of the slow exposure, they were the only ones who were actually recorded. And then here we have this detail. Okay, so these are the two humans ever to be photographed. And then here's an example of a daguerreotype. This was a photograph taken by early photographic process employing an iodine sensitized silvered plate and mercury vapor, known as a daguerreotype. The first publicly available photographic process. And for nearly 20 years, it was the most common one used. So it was invented again by Louis-Jacques Daguerre and introduced worldwide in 1839. He presented his perfected process to the French Academy of Science. The members of the Academy marveled at the minute detail and the clarity of his daguerreotype prints. To make the image, a daguerreotypist would polish a sheet of silver-plated copper to a mirror finish and then treat it with fumes that make its surface light sensitive. Exposed it in a camera for as long as was judged to be necessary, which could be as little as a few seconds for brightly sunlit objects or much longer with less intense lighting, and making the resulting image on it visible by fuming it with mercury vapor. You would then remove the sensitivity to light so that it would continue to expose by a liquid chemical treatment. It would be rinsed, dried, and then sealed because the easily marked surface was vulnerable, so it would have to be sealed behind glass in a protective enclosure. The image is on a mirror-like silver surface. It will appear either positive or negative depending on the angle at which it is viewed, how it is lit, and whether a light or dark background is being reflected in the metal. The darkest area of the image are simply bare silver, simply bare silver. And lighter areas have a microscopically fine light scattering texture. The surface is very delicate, and even like wiping it could destroy it, could permanently scuff it. And some tarnishing around the edges is normal, because it's silver. So here's the process, the lengthy process for this daguerreotype. So first, a polished silver plate copper sheet sensitized by placing it silver side down over iodine crystals. And then the iodine vapor combines with the silver to produce this light-sensitive silver iodide. And then the plate is placed into the camera, exposed to light coming through a lens to produce the latent image. And then the visible image is formed by placing the exposed plate over a dish of heated mercury vapor. The mercury vapors form an alloy in the exposed areas of silver. The unexposed silver iodide is removed and the image is fixed with a salt bath. And then the bare metal appears black in areas where no light has struck it. So quite a lengthy process. Has anyone done any, so Russell, have you ever done any darkroom exposing of, photographic paper? Or any maybe sun pictures where you actually take, light sensitive paper and then you can place, organic material on it, leaves and branches, and put them out in the sun, and then bring them in and fix them. So anyways, this was a process. It's called a photogram. And it's one of the first photographic images made by William Henry Fox Talbot in 1839. He called these photograms. And these were of flowers. And he made them by placing leaves, pieces of material onto sensitized paper, left them outdoors on a sunny day to expose. So he is, Joseph Niepce was the French, well, he was the inventor of photography, but he was, Brisa, potentially poisonous. Yes, all those, and you can do it with turmeric. Okay, well, that is much healthier. And the many artist materials, paints, were highly poisonous. So just to kind of go off on a little tangent here, many of the paint that was used by, let's say, Van Gogh, many other artists who, you would think they went mad, they suffered mental illness, and you wonder why. Well, they worked with lead paints. Many of the paints, lead white, for instance, was made with lead. Many of the cadmium actually highly poisonous. So red, cadmium blue, they were all beautiful colors. So now all of these colors are made, of course, without poisonous materials. But then you can just imagine that these paints would be absorbed through your skin. And yes, they were highly poisonous, and they would cause, mental illness. It would cause people to go mad. So even all these early photographic processes were highly poisonous, highly toxic, highly poisonous. Russell, sounds fun to experiment with. I have some film, but there are no labs here anymore. So maybe I need to try and find a way to do it myself, or wait till I can come to Canada. Yeah, you know what? You're so right. Unless you have your own dark room, there are still some places where you can buy, photographic paper and darkroom equipment. And you pretty much do have to do it yourself. It used to be, of course, that you could do it at the schools, you know, and until recently with, you know, sort of digital imaging, there were lots of labs where you could develop film. You could develop it. So now there's a few places left, few and far between. And if you want to experiment like this, I mean, it's kind of like a, you know, more of a sort of a hobby type of occupation now, making these photographs. It's still possible, but yeah, very difficult to find a lab, right? What else do I want to say about this one, the photogram? Okay, so the British inventor of photography, just kind of getting back to the point, William Henry Fox Talbot, 1800 to 1877, produced his first photogenic drawings. In 1834, in the following year, made his first camera negative. In 1833, frustrated by his own lack of skill as a draftsman, Talbot began experimenting with the possibility of creating accurate images of the world through mechanical and chemical means. By 1835, he had produced his first camera negative and soon realized that a positive image could subsequently be obtained by further printing. These investigations were put to one side until 1839, when he was shocked to learn that the French painter Louis Daguerre had succeeded in creating the photographic process, which became known as the daguerreotype. In the few years during which he was directly involved with photography, Talbot produced some masterly photographic images using the calotype process. So here's another process now. Calotype. So this is an example of the first photographic negative taken by William Henry Fox Talbot in 1835. And here was the resulting positive image. So this was the print from the first photographic negative. The sun provided the light source to contact print the negative to another sheet of sensitized paper, producing this positive image of the sky and land outside the windows. The calotype negative process was sometimes called the Talbetotype after its inventor. It was not Talbot's first photographic process, but it is the one for which he became most known. Calotype, also called Talbetotype, early photographic technique, is a sheet of paper coated with silver chloride exposed to light in a camera obscura, and those areas hit by light became dark in tone, yielding the negative image. So that's how, you know, he made this negative image, came to be known as the calotype. Calotype, and that's what he's known for. And this is the positive from that negative. And then he also, so this was called The Pencil of Nature. And here's a spread from The Pencil of Nature, 1844. It's published in 6 installments between 1844 and 1846. It was the very first photographically illustrated book to be commercially published, or in other words, the first commercially published book illustrated with photographs. It was wholly executed by the new art of photogenic drawing without any aid whatever from the artist's pencil, regarded as an important influential work in the history of photography. It was written also by William Henry Fox Talbot and published in London. The book detailed Talbot's development of the calotype process, which was his negative, and included 24 calotype prints, each one pasted in by hand. So these ones would be actual prints. This would not be on a printing press. These were his actual prints in each book that would be pasted in by hand. illustrating some of the possible applications of this new technology. Since photography was still very much a novelty and many people remained unfamiliar with the concept, Talbot felt compelled to insert the following notice into the front of his book. And it said, "The plates of the present work are impressed by the agency of light alone, without any aid whatever from the artist's pencil. They are the sun pictures themselves, and not, as some people have imagined, engravings in imitation." So again, in his book, these were actual photographs that were pasted in by hand. The text would have gone through a press, but not the photographs, the illustrations. And here, by comparison, as a communication tool, how many people are familiar with this very famous painting? This is The Death of Marat by, Angelique is Jacques-Louis David, who's a neoclassical artist during the French Revolution. This was painted in 1793. Why is it significant? Well, ultimately, the death of Marat became a true symbol of the French Revolution. The painting shows the radical journalist, Marat, lying dead in his bath on July 13, 1793, after his murder by Charlotte Corday. So he was a journalist who was writing against the aristocracy, and Charlotte Corday was actually a sympathizer of the aristocracy. So she wanted to stop him from, writing all of the negative propaganda about the aristocracy. Marat's death is depicted in this famous painting. The artist Jacques-Louis David was a fellow colleague of Marat, so they knew each other. In the painting, David shows Marat in a bathtub full of blood, pen in hand. In his other hand, Marat holds a petition given to him by Corday prior to his murder. So she walks in, he's there in his bath because supposedly he had a skin condition. He had to always soak in a bath, but she comes in and she distracts him with this petition, and then she stabs him. So David intended to record more than just the horror of martyrdom in this sense. For realistic as it is in its details, the painting is a methodical construction focusing on the victim, a striking setup regarded today by several critics as an awful, beautiful lie, a form of propaganda, and certainly not a photograph in the forensic scientific sense. So this wasn't really the scene. If you'd taken a photograph of it, this is not what you would see. And it was barely the simple image it may seem. For instance, in the painting, the knife is not to be seen where Corday had left it impaled in his chest. It's on the ground beside the bathtub. Also, it said that the way that his right arm is dangling down over the tub is similar to Christ's arm in the Pietà, where he's draped over Mary Magdalene's lap. So he's trying to kind of compare him in martyrdom with Christ, right, to evoke emotion from the viewer. So with this painting, Jacques-Louis David displays Marat's death in a way that shows innocence and strikes compassion. David wanted viewers to see the sacrifice Marat made for utilizing his freedom of speech. The image of Marat's blood left on the petition perhaps explains how Marat left a lasting mark on the French Revolution. Although Marat's legacy is a thing of the past, the painting of his death still lives on. It continues to remind people about the impact that the power of words and free press had on the French Revolution. Because as you know, the aristocracy was overthrown by the sharing of information. So in contrast To David's idealized version of documenting Marat's death, photography captures instead a realistic historical record. So here we have a photograph of Dunkirk Church and the Dead by Matthew Brady from 1862 during the Civil War. Matthew Brady was one of the earliest photographers in American history, best known for his scenes of the Civil War. He studied under inventor Samuel F.B. Morse, who pioneered the daguerreotype technique in America. During the Civil War, Brady and his associates traveled throughout the eastern part of the country, capturing the effects of the war through photographs of people, towns, and battlefields. Additionally, Brady kept studios in Washington, D.C. and New York City, where many influential politicians and war heroes sat for portraits. Brady's photographic documentation had this profound impact on the public's romantic ideal of the war. Okay, so again, it would have been romanticized to recruit more soldiers, but in fact, there was no romanticism here. So, showing the public the actual, facts about the war had this dramatic impact. After the Civil War, photography became an important documentary and communications tool in the exploration of new territory and opening of the American West. These images of the West, taken by Brady, inspired the great wanderlust that eventually conquered all of North America. And another important documentation tool for photography was utilized by Edward Muybridge in 1878. This was taken from actually a large book that examines the biomechanics of many different mammals. But he started off with horses because there was always this disagreement about how a horse actually moves in flight and how its legs are moving, and whether a horse actually becomes airborne during the suspension phase in, let's say, the gallop. So this was The Horse in Motion, 1878, by Edward Muybridge. You can still get this book. So when a horse trots or gallops, does it ever become fully airborne? This was the question that Muybridge set out to answer in 1878. So Muybridge developed a way to take photos with an exposure lasting a fraction of a second, and with reporters as witnesses, arranged 12 cameras along a racetrack. As a horse sped by, it tripped wires connected to the cameras, which took 12 photos in rapid succession. Muybridge developed images on site, and in the frames revealed that a horse aloft underneath for a brief moment during a stride. So it was always thought and depicted in earlier paintings that horses sort of ran with their legs either outstretched at the same time or completely underneath, but always on the ground. So always kind of artificial looking. So this revelation is imperceptible to the naked eye, but apparent through photography, marked a new purpose for the medium. It could capture truth through technology. As a result, artists painted horses and other animals in accurate biomechanics with this new knowledge. And as well, Muybridge's stop motion technique was an early form of animation, as you can see here, that helped pave the way for motion picture industry, which was born just a short decade later. So that's it for today. Are there any, questions, comments, observations? Okay, so let's take, it's 1:15 now. Let's take a 15-minute break. I'm going to turn this recording